Good morning, everyone. It is time to get ready to move on from just linear equations and on to the next thing. Next, we're going to be talking about inequalities. But before that, we want to recap everything we've done with our linear equations so far. So the first thing I want to say is this is a review for your quiz that you're going to be taking. And I have labeled everything that we talk about with the problem it will associate with in your quiz, so you can kind of keep track of what to expect with that quiz a little bit more. The first thing you'll do is you'll be asked some different things about equations and the ways that we see them. So the first thing is we want to be able to identify slope equation. So the slope equation is m equals, we call it the change in y over the change in x. In other words, y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Remember, this is the same as rise over run. And I like to play the word game of rise over run. Sounds like wise over run. So we have our y's on top, and the run on the bottom is x. The next thing is standard form. Standard form of our equation a lot of times is more so how we view word problems, or how we are able to take something from a real life application and apply it into an equation that we can manipulate and use to find the information we need. So standard form was ax plus by equals c. X and y are still the same variables that go with our xy coordinate graph. However, a, b, and c are just some variables that we have in place for numbers right now. So those would be a constant number that gets plugged in. Now usually we'll write the standard form so that we can write out a slope-intercept form of an equation so that we can actually graph this. And slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. And we call this one slope-intercept form because we are given m, our slope, and b, the intercept on the y-axis. So our point that crosses the y-axis is b, and how far up and down we're going is m. So that's our slope-intercept form. The last thing that you could see is parallel lines have what kind of slope? Well, if they're parallel, that means that they never intersect, they never cross each other because they have the same slope. And perpendicular lines have a particular slope so that they meet at perfect 90-degree angles and only intersect at one point. We say that their slopes are negative reciprocals. So these are some potential questions you could see as the first thing on the quiz. So make sure you know those equations, you know how to find the slope, those kinds of things. The second thing you'll see is how do we find slope when we are given the points. In this case, we have negative 11 and 7 and negative 11, negative 2. And we want to find that slope. So again, we want to use that slope equation, m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And the y2, y1 just means what coordinate point do they come out of. The first point is always going to be my x and y1, and the second point are my x2 and my y2. So my y2 is negative 2, and I'm going to minus y1, which is 7. On the bottom, I have negative 11, and I minus negative 11 from that. Now, before we get into solving this, there's a couple of different ways that we could see slope. We could just have any number, could be 2, could be 1/3, could be negative 5/2, right? There's lots of different examples that we could have for slope, but there's a couple of specific ones. One is 0, and the other is undefined. So now when we have a 0 slope, that means that when I simplified these numbers, I add or subtract however it's going to turn out. That means that I had a 0 on top and some number on the bottom. Doesn't matter what number, Because whenever I take 0 and try to divide it by anything, then I just get 0 again. Think of it as wanting to have 10 things split into 0 groups. Well, then I'm going to have 0 groups, right? Undefined, though, the reason why it's undefined is because we are trying to divide by 0, whatever number it might be. Doesn't matter what I'm talking about. If I have 5 things and I want to split them into 0 groups, well, I can't do that. I can't have 0 groups of anything. Whereas over here, I could split 0 things into 10 groups. That just means I have nothing. But if I'm trying to split something into 0 groups, that doesn't work. We can't divide by 0. Those of you who are questioning why, Siri will give you a long explanation as to why we can't divide by 0. So if you want to have a little bit of fun listening to that, you can ask Siri what happens when you divide by 0. Now that we've talked about the different examples for slope, let's take a look at what this actually becomes. So if I take -2 minus 7, so I have a negative, I'm taking more away, so I'm really just adding these together to get a more negative number. 2 and 7 together would give me a -11. On the bottom, though, I have -11, but I'm minusing a -11, so that means I'm really adding a positive. So if I have -11 plus 11, then I would have 0. Now, as we talked about these cases down here, when I have a number on top and I'm trying to divide by 0, this is a very specific slope. This is my undefined slope. So the second problem you'll see will give you 2 points, and it will ask you to find the slope. So you'll either put in a number, a fraction, might be 0, it could be undefined. The third problem on this quiz, you'll be given the slope, and you'll need to use a point to write the equation of the line. Well, if I know that the slope is -3, that means my m equals -3. And anytime that we see a point, we can label this as x and y. That's always what my point is going to be. Now, when we want to write the equation of these lines, we want it so that it's easy to graph, especially since I'm given my slope. That means I'm going to use that y equals mx plus b form, my slope-intercept form. Well, I know slope, I can plug that in right away. Y equals -3x plus b. Now I'm going to plug in 3, -1 for my points, which means y is -1 and 3 is x. -3 times 3 for x plus b. The next step is I want to get b by itself. So I need to multiply -3 by +3, which will give me -9 plus b, and I have -1 over here. To get b by itself, I have a -9. That means that I need to add 9 to both sides. -1 plus 9 would give me a +8 for b. So if b is -8, that means I can take and plug this back into my equation up here. And my final equation would say y equals -3x plus 8. So that would be an example of what a problem for question 3 would look like. So we've got our first few example problems here for you so that you are prepared for that quiz. Now I've got 2 more examples for you because our quiz is going to be a total of 5 questions. For question 4, you'll be given 2 points and need to write the equation of the line. That means we first need to find our slope. We can't do anything without slope. And the slope equation is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And we want to label our points x1, y1, x2, y2. And we're given the 2 points, -4, 8, and 1, 3. So let's find our slope. We said that we want y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So on top here, I would have 3 minus 8, which would give me a negative 5. And if I have 1 minus a negative 4, minus a negative becomes plus a positive. So 1 plus 4 would give me 5. Well, negative 5 divided by 5 simplifies to negative 1. So that means my slope is negative 1. And I can start writing my equation. Again, we want to write an equation using our slope, which means we're going to use the slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. So I can plug in my m, y equals negative 1x plus b. And the next thing I need to do is I need to pick one of these points that I want to plug in and solve just like we did for the last problem. Well, I like working with smaller numbers that don't have negatives, so I'm going to use 1, 3. That doesn't mean negative 4, 8 is wrong. I just find smaller, not negative numbers to be easier to work with. So I would plug 3 in for y and 1 in for x. Now I'm trying to solve for b. I need to figure out what that is to finish my equation. So since I have negative 1 times 1, that will still be negative 1 plus b. And on the left side I have 3. To get b by itself, I add 1 to both sides, and I have 4 equals b. Now, again, this isn't my final answer. I needed to write the equation of the line. So I need to plug this in for b up here. So my final answer, y equals negative 1x plus 4. Now, some of you might be thinking, since this is a negative 1x, do I really need the 1 here? Well, no, as long as you keep it negative. So you could still say that this is y equals negative x plus 4. Either answer is right. I'm not going to count either of those wrong. If you like to leave the 1 in front so that you know there is a negative 1 in front of x, that's completely fine. If you like to think of it as just negative x, that's fine too. That works out just as well. For your final problem, you'll be given an equation and asked to write an equation that is either parallel or perpendicular. Remember, parallel lines have the same slope. However, when we think of perpendicular lines, they're not the same. They're in fact the exact opposite of what we're given. So in this case, we have y equals negative 3x plus 2. And if I want it to be perpendicular, that means that I'm going to take the negative reciprocal. That means that instead of my slope being negative 3, the first thing I need to do is make it negative. Well, it's already negative, but if I take a negative number and make it negative, in other words, make it the opposite, it becomes a positive. But that's only the negative part. I still need to do the reciprocal. And this isn't a fraction right now. But remember, any whole number that we have, we can write as over 1. So our reciprocal for 3 over 1 would be 1/3. So our slope from this equation, we get that our perpendicular slope would be 1/3. Now, I don't need this equation anymore. All I needed it for was to figure out what my slope is going to be if I have a perpendicular line. Now, I want this line to pass through the point 3, negative 1. At this point, everything is the same as the last couple of problems we've done. I know I have a slope and I'm given a point. That means I need to use my slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, to plug in my slope, use my point to write the equation. So y equals 1/3 x plus b. X is 3, y is negative 1. Negative 1 equals 1/3 times 3 plus b. I want b all by itself, so that means I'm going to take 1/3 times 3 to get 1 plus b, and that's still equal to negative 1. To get b by itself, I subtract 1 from both sides, and I get b is equal to -2. Now, again, this isn't my final answer. I need to take and plug this in for the equation that I need. So my final answer would be y equals 1/3 x minus 2. This would be an equation that is perpendicular to the line y equals -3x plus 2 and passes through the point 3, -1. Now, I have submitted or uploaded a review assignment for you in Delta Math if you would like to practice any of these types of problems. I have them all separated based on the types of questions you could have. As always, if you have any questions, please don't be afraid to shoot me an email, send me a message on Schoology, whatever it is, so that we can get you some extra help before we take this quiz. Have a good day.